Hey, everyone, and welcome to the YoJoeShow Podcast. Hey, Joe, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Joseph. How you doing, yo?
I'm awake and alive. How's this week been coming along?
Oh, busy week, busy week. All good though. Can't complain. Good,
I
Yontif.
definitely
How's
understand.
how's Passover going?
Passover has been beautiful, thankfully. Yeah, enjoyed the Seder last night.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think on the docket we have a whole bunch of very interesting topics to discuss. The most interesting of which will be China. I think we're going to get started with that. In
Yep, that's a good
terms
place to start.
Yes. So I remember back when I was doing cybersecurity research for the Israeli military intelligence, and one of the training materials I had was, and I probably shouldn't be saying this on a podcast, but it'll be okay. It was like a generic research by the Shin Bet, which is like the internal, like the Israeli FBI, who are in charge of counter espionage, i.e., finding enemy spies within your country, and it was about China. China. Specifically about the culture of cheating in China. Because basically, 400 years ago, there was an emperor in China, and he kind of prioritized, I guess, results over everything else, even against playing dirty. So, whereas in a Israeli or American school, if somebody is caught cheating, they'll usually be punished. In China, they'll usually be rewarded. So cheating is not necessarily looked upon as a bad thing. It's actually looked upon as a good thing. It's a effective way of getting ahead. And boy, is it effective as we've seen with China copying U.S. manufacturing and German manufacturing, etc. But basically instilled into the culture for the last 400 years has been this concept of like cheating and stealing is a legitimate way of getting ahead, and then B, in service of reporting to the central authority, which obviously at the time it wasn't the chairman, it wasn't the CCP 400 years ago, but even back then, even with the emperors, kind of spilling the beans or giving the details or ratting out your friends was just to be anticipated. So it's a cultural thing that's kind of been inbred in many Chinese people for a very long time. And obviously, none of us have anything against the Chinese people. They're wonderful, very loving, and very kind people. Um, but the regime that now rules them is a little emblematic of the Chinese culture. One may say. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would say, that definitely is a challenge when you don't look at things the same way, right? When you talk about, let's say, a sporting event, you want to play by the same rules on both teams, right? You can't have rules for one team and different rules for the other.
Hmm.
IP theft, basically getting the information and making it work no matter what, not playing by the rules. That has been a challenge. That's been one of the things that uh, you know Chinese trade has always brought up as being a big barrier to having some sort of fairness in the trade. We actually, I have a clip that I know we discussed that probably be a good starting point. This is from the U.S. Senate Committee on Aging, talking about IP theft, fairness, and so forth. And there's actually a few clips that we have that go over this. But I think maybe if we can take a listen, I can cue that up, and we can have
Yeah,
uh,
definitely. So
maybe
I
that
think
as a starting point. Does that make sense?
yes, definitely. I think people have a narrative that the U.S. is a dying superpower. A lot find many resemblances between the US's current state and different periods in Rome's fall. So that's been a very popular narrative. And then part of that narrative is that the counterbalance to the United States' hegemony starting to collapse, supposedly, is the growth of this new Chinese superpower. I'm a little hesitant on that. So basically, this whole culture of lying and cheating, right? It basically is part of reporting, right? So if you buy a stock in a US company, right, you'll typically have control over that stock. You'll be considered a shareholder. And if you have equal rights, like with most corporations, you'll actually have the right to vote on important issues for the company, right? Uh, in terms of owning Chinese stocks, if you're an American, you're not ever owning a Chinese stock. You own a contract with a company in like the Seychelles or one of those tax havens that supposedly reports to own a representative stock in the Chinese stock exchange, but you have no rights whatsoever. And plus, the Communist Party has in every single company within China, they have one vote that can override everybody else's vote. So that kind of makes it obviously very unfair, but more realistically, the numbers are exaggerations and lies all the way up, right? And so what happens is at the local level, every manufacturing, every whatever it is, the lowest level manager is going to lie to try and make his numbers look a little bit better, because otherwise he's going to look worse compared to all the other managers around him who are lying. So he has to lie in order to not be penalized for performing worse than everybody else, right? And then that manager will lie to the regional manager, which will lie to, to the VP. And basically it's lies all the way up. And what happens with exaggerations is, the first one just exaggerates a little. Okay, we didn't actually produce 8, we produced, 6, right? But we'll say we produced 8. And then the next manager's like, 8? The other team said they produced 12. We have to say we produced 16, right? So that the next manager says we produced 16. And then the next one up says, oh, 16? That's it? Those guys said they produced 32. We're probably at 35, right? And basically every number from every Chinese manufacturer is something I'm completely unwilling to trust in terms of production capabilities, in terms of financial disclosures and kind of financial results. Like basically take everything that comes out of China with a master pound worth of salt. Now, other reasons why I think this whole narrative is China being an upcoming superpower is false is Chinese are dying to get their money out of China. There's almost no way to do so. Most Chinese are therefore forced to invest in one of two options. Historically, the most reliable option was real estate. And with Evergreen, collapsing and many other Chinese real estate companies collapsing and all of the ghost cities we've seen all over China, which is this, production counts as part of GDP. So if I have to have good numbers, all I have to do is build. And then once I build, then, it's great for the GDP. And then, my district will be doing well. I'll get promotions. But that is obviously we've seen that's collapsing because they're building where people don't want to live, where right that's the whole concept of ghost cities, right? What the outcome of basically bad policies or misaligned incentives. We've been repeating this again. Misaligned incentives cause very bad outcomes, right? So the entire economy is kind of built on all these fake numbers. The only other place Chinese people can invest their money is in the Chinese stock market. They cannot legally invest it outside of the Chinese stock market, and that is filled with lies nonstop. So yeah, let's go ahead and get the first video going.
Yeah, and before we play it, I'll just point out that, a number of years ago, I researched sort of a current event at the time where, Toyota and Lexus were having a real problem that ultimately it was discovered that those vehicles at the time, there was a large piece of the market, they were producing vehicles that had a serious computer glitch where people were dying for a number of years. And after a whistleblower came out,
Takata, the manufacturer of the airbags, and they were Takata was like the largest manufacturer of airbags for almost every car company in the world, and they were faulty with their airbags, and it caused many lives.
right, and this was different. This was an acceleration slash their centralized computing for their vehicles, the Toyota Lexus vehicles, as a subset of their vehicles. When the software would freeze, it would freeze everything. There was no fail-safe. So you couldn't use the brakes, you couldn't stop the acceleration, you couldn't turn the vehicle off, and a number of people died. A whistleblower came forth, and ultimately the company finally, after having all these sort of fake recalls, they're saying that their floor mats were a problem, or the accelerator pedal was too big and was getting snagged. They finally admitted that they had an issue. They were fined, but by that time, a number of people had died. And one of the things that came out when I was researching, how this could have even happened, how the company could have been aware of what was going on. The whistleblower was actually a translator that would translate from Japanese to English and back and forth amongst the engineers. And she basically posted the information, I think, to Facebook at the time, basically saying, look, they know there's a problem. So one of the things in the, I guess, the totality of that case was that it appeared that there was a cultural issue, that some of the people, so it's not just China, this happened in Japan, it can happen in other countries, where there's a tremendous reluctance to to fail at any
Admit
cost.
fault.
In aviation, that was a problem that existed, for many, many years, that the captain on the flight deck was the person who would make all the decisions, and they were like the king, basically, or queen, theoretically, of that flight. And after a very serious, disaster, crew resource management became a thing where ultimately it wasn't just the one captain, but any of the flight crew that was there. So the first officer, or other people would call the co-pilot, or any of the other individuals who were on the plane as part of the crew, would be able to voice a concern, and it wouldn't be that they'd be vetoed automatically by the person with the highest seniority. These sort of systems that can exist again in government and so forth can lead to things like this, where win at all costs, don't bring up issues, don't bring up problems. You just have to accept. I'm gonna play this now, and we'll kind of be able to get a kind of a feel for kind of some of the discussions going on out there. Let me get this going. Here we go.
So, Mr. O'Leary, what if there was a company called WeatherTech? And they produce really nice mats for their car.
I have them in my F-150.
And they woke up one day and they looked on Alibaba and they saw that their products were being sold on Alibaba. And they looked at their shipping, and they never had done any business with Alibaba. And they looked just like the mats that they produced in Illinois, and they even had their name on it, right? What could they do to stop this theft of their product? And they got nothing for it. What would be their recourse right now?
There is nothing they can do. You have just told the story of 1 million small businesses in America over the last 20 years. They innovate, they create, they're entrepreneurs, they prove their product in the American consumer market at around 5 million in sales. They're knocked off. By whom? China. Very often, the same plants that ran the molds under a relationship they had with the company. A lot of companies went to China 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and put their molds there, and during the day, the company would run the WeatherTech mat, in this example, here theoretically, and then at night, they'd run the knockoff mat. And they would bring it into the market, let me guess, 30% off retail of WeatherTech. And I've seen this happen countless times. And in some cases where the company's very small, they go out of business, and nobody hears that tree falling in the forest. It happens thousands of times. There's such an immense opportunity here to enforce existing laws, but really, at the end of the day, the reason that behemoth company couldn't do anything about it, they have no access to the Chinese courts. They can't resolve the complaint through litigation, as we do here. So my recommendation is, look, if you're a Chinese company and you want to use our courts to litigate your complaint, sorry. Not until you open yours. We'd love to work with you, but unless it's a reciprocal play, the whole idea of today's conversation was just to get to a reciprocal playing field, an even playing field. American companies have always been very competitive anywhere on earth when given a chance on a transparent and competitive playing field. That's not the case in China. I mean, we're all saying the same thing here. It's got to get fixed. And finally, here we are, with tariffs being the excuse, but now I think she has to come to the table, and I hope it happens. And I'd like to see tomorrow morning 400% tariffs.
Yeah, so rumor has it that Trump has been personally trying to message Xi and reach out to the Chinese regime to try and get direct talks between him and Xi Jinping. to get direct talks between him and Xi Jinping going, but apparently she has been completely unwilling to correspond directly with Trump, which is interesting because we did see them correspond directly in the previous administration.
Yeah, that's that's definitely an issue. I mean, ultimately, the question is really when we talk about trade, the reality is, first of all, there has to be communication, and B, what is a level playing field? That Breitbart, uh, you know, feed that basically came from the hearing, ultimately sums up pretty much a serious issue, right? This isn't like every other country. We've had countries that have come to the table wanting to discuss, wanting to be able to have uh, sort of open negotiations as to how to move forward with regards to tariffs, with regards to trade. China's not willing and interested maybe in playing the game and having that conversation, and this may be why.
Yeah, yeah. Why should they basically? No,
I agree. I mean, that's
losing.
ultimately one of the uh, things is like if they feel they don't need to, or at least if they want to put on the persona that they don't need to, that they have nothing to discuss and they have no interest in doing that. That's perhaps why China is an outlier compared to these other countries. I mean, the other thing there's specifically with regards to IP theft, okay,
Mhm.
coming in and taking really things that have been created here in the United States, copying them and essentially using them, all over the world, but basically through, essentially manufacturing them in China. That's the problem. I mean,
Mhm.
ultimately, we we know that this happens. It's not just isolated to one thing or another. This is a serious matter that I mean, even farmers. I have a clip that we talked about as well that talks about how even seeds are being basically stolen and remanufactured in China. I think that'd be a good next one to cue.
For sure, for sure. There's a surprising amount of tech that goes into the seeds we use for agriculture. Monsanto obviously is kind of a monopoly on the topic. One of the reasons is because they've been extremely innovative at creating really useful seeds that could be drought resistant, they could be pest resistant, they can obviously grow, larger fruit, more beneficial fruit, etc., so that the quality of the produce can go up. The discussion on GMO is a completely separate one, but it is hardcore tech. Like it's years of research and development, and GMO kind of makes it easy. But before GMO, it was much harder to do this research. You're right. You had to plant 5,000 trees and then wait for them all to grow 10 years before you can start harvesting the apples to try and compare and create the next new you know uh corn dish or whatever the good apples are called, right? Crispy Reds or whatever they are. So it very long term, very hardcore research, and then for the Chinese, they just come in and copy it.
Yeah, and again, that's another massive discussion in and of itself, right? Trying to debate the ins and outs of genetically modified crops here in the United States. Bottom line is, if we invent something, someone shouldn't be taking it, copying it, and selling it as if it's something that they created. Here,
Hmm.
this is via NTD News, and it's an interesting, very short clip. Let me just play it right now.
Awesome.
They have no interest in protecting our intellectual property. We had a situation on our farm and other farms throughout the Midwest where we were producing seeds, in our case for Bayer. Chinese nationals that were coming out at night, digging up the pure parent lines of the seed that we was producing on our farm, only to be taken to Chicago O'Hare, put in a warehouse, and then shipped back to China. They think that's perfectly fine. Well, it's not fine. There's hundreds of millions of dollars go into research to develop these new products and then to produce and take it to the marketplace, but yet the Chinese captured that, the value of that, and stole it from the United States.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really what we've been seeing. I think um, this whole trade tariff with China, I think the whole kind of world economic order we've been used to, where China is the manufacturer and the world is the consumer, specifically America is the consumer, that is about to change. We've already started seeing that kind of ever since COVID. We've seen, like we said, companies moving their manufacturing to Southeast Asia and to Mexico. But now we're going to see a whole lot more in-house, especially in the US, in-house production. So the tariffs are critical. Now, I think the problem with dictators is that power gets to their heads. And we see this every time with every single dictator, right? Putin convinced that he can conquer all of Ukraine within 3 days. Convinced that the Ukrainians are just dying to join Russia and to yell, hail Putin, right? When in reality, they were very much, proud of their own sovereignty. So dictators, the power gets to their head. With Xi Jinping, we've definitely seen this coming as he kind of grasped more and more to power over the past 20 years, more or less. He's basically assassinated every single one of his competitors or anybody who can seemingly be one, and he's basically killed anybody who doesn't report yes. So he lives in like a loop. So dictators end up getting delusional because they end up killing everybody who gives them bad news, and then all there are left is with people who give them good news. So I think she is convinced that China really is a superpower. It's funny because, like we said, they're dependent on their export to the United States and Europe. The minute a war starts, they won't have any export. They're also dependent on their import. Previously, we mentioned oil from, Iran and Qatar, natural gas from Qatar, and just from the Middle East. But it's not just that. We're seeing from all over the world, right? So it's not just oil, lots of raw materials. They're extremely dependent on imports and on exports. So the minute a war starts, they're left with nothing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But the persona, the stance that they're taking is that that's not the case. Ultimately, whether we agree or disagree with them, clearly their way of thinking, or at least their way of thinking towards the world, is that they've been perfectly fair and they're doing everything correctly. They're also kind of laughing at the notion that we're going to bring manufacturing back to the United States. There's that clip that's gone somewhat viral that they posted, basically making fun of the U.S.
Yeah, the Chinese AI.
manufacturing.
Yeah.
That's I have that one. I have that one as well. I can cue that one up.
This one is
It's
entertaining. So if you guys are listening only podcast, advise checking out YouTube. But we'll kind of try and summarize what you're seeing after the clip as well. So
Yes.
for audio listeners only.
Yes, correct. So for any that don't have audio, ultimately we'll fill in on, like, this next one. There's no audio, but we will describe kind of what's being, what's playing. And ultimately listen, humor is the best medicine. Laughter is the best medicine. I think humor is terrific, and I have no problems with China trying to make some fun of us. We'll do the same back to them. Ultimately, the question is just how much do they believe in their own humor? Do they really believe that our manufacturing is so incapable and that the American worker is just so not able to do what needs to be done? That being said, here let me play this. And again, for those just listening to us, it shows essentially a factory with a number of workers sewing garments. Everybody seems to be pretty much obese and operating sort of very slowly and not particularly very skilled. Do you want to describe it a little better, Joseph?
Yeah, it's funny because it's basically like I guess when they wrote to the AI, making AI of fat Americans working in factories, it just copied Chinese factories. So it's very visibly Chinese factories. It's very visibly like they even have like the Chinese little casquette, caps that the factory workers wear. But it is very clearly Americans, white, fat, obese, sometimes African Americans as well, and spaced out. Basically, they're working, but they're not focused. So the idea is, yes, you can try and bring manufacturing back to the U.S., but Americans are lazy and don't like hard work. And like we've mentioned on the previous episode, the solution to that is technology. We're seeing, obviously, automation in factories is now close to 80%. And then the remaining 20% can be done by humanoid robots very, very soon, as in like early next year, probably, depending on the factory, depending on the need. So that issue won't be an issue. And I think there are many hardworking Americans, though they may be hard to find sometimes.
Well, listen, so again, it's all stereotypes, just like we can have stereotypes of other countries, they'll have of us. I think there was a certain level of amusement with what they did, but the question is, do they believe it? Of course, it wouldn't be a normal day here in the United States legacy media if we didn't have what used to be our, evening comedy, basically slanting on supporting the same notions that China is trying to portray. I have a clip from Jimmy Kimmel, which I find absolutely amusing, although ridiculous, but amusing nevertheless. Basically agreeing with China and making fun of us being able to bring back manufacturing here. And like you said, a lot of what is done is via automation. A lot of what's done will be with AI. So this idea that we have, and that everyone here is incapable and physically incapable of doing manufacturing jobs is, ridiculous. We can joke about it, but I think to take it to the level that that they're, late night, show, they're actually making fun of it, making it seem as if it's a total joke that we want to bring back manufacturing here because we just can't, and China is just going to absolutely be better than us, is a little too far. Here, let me play this. Tell me what you think. I don't know if you've seen this clip. Let me go ahead and play it for you.
Trump said iPhones can be made in the U.S. Yeah, Trump wants American-made iPhones. They're going to be a little different, though. Watch this.
Apple is proud to offer its first ever American-made iPhone. It's the same iPhone you love, but instead of Siri, we're introducing Donnie. You can ask him questions like, "Hey Donnie, what is the weather today?"
Climate change is a hoax invented by China.
"Donnie, where's the nearest gas station?"
Your car wouldn't need gas if you drove a Tesla.
"Donnie, play Abracadabra by Lady Gaga."
Abracadabra, mo na na, like a bing bong, bing bong, bing bong, bing bong, bong.
"Donnie, what's on my shopping list?"
Milk, bread, Canada, and Greenland.
And Donnie, remind me to pick up my kids from school.
There's no more education department. Your kids are busy making iPhones.
The American iPhone.
Coming soon for $6,000.
Oh, my goodness. Johnny.
Yeah, it's actually pretty funny, entertaining, but also unsurprising. It seems like late night shows can do nothing aside from shit all over the US. It seems like that's their primary task in life, is to kind of show the world and show us how bad we are at everything. So I think a little bit of optimism, a little bit of hope, a little bit of yes, we can do it spirit can definitely go a long way. We are the ones who are currently building the largest rocket on planet Earth that can take humanity not just to the moon, but to Mars, and is completely reusable, right? We are currently still the masters of manufacturing EVs. Here's a statistic I doubt most of you guys have heard. In China, Tesla is the #1 best-selling EV. The Tesla Model Y now for at least a few months in a row. That means it's beating out all of the Chinese competition, including BYD, including Great Wall, including all of the other Chinese manufacturers, and there are thousands of them who sell successfully in and around the world, Mexico, Europe, etc. In China, these companies are struggling and have not been able to beat the Tesla Model Y sales, and even Tesla Model 3 is up there. So it's very interesting. This is their home turf, and they're basically not able to win it there. So maybe the fact that they're successful in other places has to do with currency manipulation and trade barriers and some other things as well. Just a note worth thinking.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And listen, this is nothing new, right? Here's a clip that I don't think you've seen. It's an old clip it has President Obama being questioned on China trade. This is from quite a few years ago, and look what he had to say. It's a very quick clip. Let me know your thoughts on this.
Number 3 is that if we don't write the rules, China will write the rules out in that region. We will be shut out. American businesses, American agriculture, that will mean a loss of U.S. jobs.
And that's from
Yeah. So
oh yeah, I mean, listen, it's not like this is something new or this is something related to the way Trump is specifically looking at it, right?
yeah, I saw a video from Nancy Pelosi, just like 5 or 7 years ago or something, also talking about how we have to raise tariffs on China and we have to start a trade war with them because otherwise they're going to eat our lunch. So it's funny. Trump is being criticized for having, this ultra right wing radical cabinet, and he himself is worse than Hitler, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then you look at it, and Trump himself is a former Democrat. Many high-ranking members of his current administration are previous, Democrats, and a lot of the policies he's been enacting are hardcore Democrat policies, right? There are many videos of Obama and of Clinton talking about how basically we desperately need DOGE, otherwise the U.S. is going to go bankrupt. Otherwise, we won't be able to cover Social Security and other, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. So finally the US is getting up and doing all of these things that the Democrats have been promising that they do for decades but never did. And the Democrats are losing their shit. And it seems like the reason for that is because over the past 5 years, many in the Democratic elite have basically gotten in on the grift, and now they have what to lose and they don't want to be exposed, which is why they're fighting DOGE so strongly. Do we have more clips on China, or should we move on to DOGE?
I think another thing that we touched on the previous episode was, all the tariffs, right? So there's a reason why these tariffs are important, and they're basically a means of trying to level the playing field. Okay, I think that's really where we're at, because we have tariffs imposed by other countries, including China, and it makes their markets, for the most part, inaccessible to many of our manufacturers. So here's Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, again, one more time. Very smart guy, very successful, understatement, very successful businessman here in the United States. And this is his take on, which has been widely reported on, the 125% tariffs currently being imposed on China, and what his thoughts are on this. Let me know what you think. Here we go.
If there is unemployment, poverty in the United States, that is a homegrown American problem, actually, that various different governments have let down neglected communities.
Well, we're talking about China specifically right now. China and the United States are in an economic war, not a military war. They're vying for supremacy of the largest economy. Right now, when we measure it today, the United States is about 26.1% of the world's GDP and almost 40% of all consumption. That's a very powerful hand to have when a lot of the products that China makes, and I might add, employ Chinese workers. Think about the dilemma she has this morning. Right now, as we speak, there's all kinds of factories where they have nowhere to sell their products because the tariffs at 125% are so punitive. What are where are those workers going? Are they going to go into the streets when they're no longer employed? When you're the supreme leader, the last thing you can have happen has the population unemployed and unfed. That's what she is really, that's the risk he has, because it's...
Won't she just find markets elsewhere, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia? And as you say, America is the great consumer. America is buying Chinese products. So American consumers are going to be hurt, aren't they, by these tariffs?
Who blinks first is the narrative you and I are having right now, because I think Xi doesn't have to get elected. He has to just make sure people are employed. And when those factories shut down, and it could happen pretty quickly within 90 days, because if you're thinking, oh, I can make all these products that sell them to Africa, there's no GDP large enough to absorb them. While the United States consumes the most of everything, is the time to have this discussion. You may not like the sausage being made and watching it, or the volatility in the markets, but I'm at the point now, after 20 years of dealing with China, and there's millions of investors that feel the same way I do. Let's get this over with. Let's get to the table and solve this problem, because it's unsustainable long term.
Yeah, so this is a great clip. First of all, I haven't watched this yet, but first of all, watching Kevin O'Leary on the phone, it almost looks like this is an AI video, but with his beautiful fancy suit and white shirt and very nice tie, and then he's wearing pajama pants on the bottom. So he's very used to.
He does that all the time, right? He's on CNN or Fox News, Fox Business. he's from the waist up in a suit,
Yeah.
but very often he'll have a second camera, often an iPhone or something, filming him too, and he'll actually post those as well on his own channels.
Interesting. Yeah, so I haven't
so-
watched that. I think the topic of conversation here is very interesting. I mean, the interviewer's dumb question, I literally couldn't hold myself back from laughing of like, oh, well, China will just sell the products elsewhere. It's like, sure, they can do that at 1/5 the price. Maybe they can sell to Europe at 4/5 the price. They can sell to, other developed countries at 3/5 the price. Then like second world countries at 2/5 the price, and then they'll sell it to Africa at 1/5 the price. So 1/5 the price, which means at no profit almost. So yeah, that the whole concept of, oh sure, though everybody else can just buy instead of the US, that's false. Yes, the US may be a little constrained on cheap Chinese plastic shit over the coming few years until manufacturing ramps up. But I think we are going to see a pivot. I think really Xi doesn't have any firm ground to stand on, and if he thinks he does, then he's really being delusional. Like Kevin O'Leary said, the question is who blinks first, right?
I completely agree, and of course, China's not giving that sort of. They're not giving up, right? They're not rolling over and having their belly petted and being submissive. If a very articulate response that actually shows what China's position is one of defiance and believing that it doesn't really matter what the United States does, and all the things that Kevin O'Leary is saying really aren't that important. I have a clip that, again, I want to share with you. Not sure if you've seen it, and it articulates the public relations answer that China's also giving. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, so we saw 75 countries now line up to sign some form of trade agreements with the US, hopefully free trade agreements, but actually free trade agreements, right? So the almost projection that many on the left have been trying to push is like, we live in a free trade world, and now Trump is, throwing that out the window, and he's replacing all that with tariffs, which is very protectionism, and it's going to, make US companies less competitive because now they don't have, competition to fight against, etc. I think that entire narrative is very, very almost kind of false because, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, no, it is. But that's the narrative, right? So here, the clip I actually found it. It's from Victor Gao. He's the VP for the Center for China and Globalization, and he's giving the other side of the argument that basically the same as would be coming from China directly. Let me play that, and you can tell me what you think with regards to
just to finish the point I was trying to make.
Sure.
Yes, theoretically, we were in a free trade agreement world, but there wasn't free trade, right? Maybe the US signed free trade agreements with many countries, but then they would slowly kind of add on tariffs and the US wouldn't do anything in return. But it doesn't have to be tariffs, right? Many times it's regulation. So I think somebody from the administration recently gave the example. They said, when we signed the free trade agreement with South Korea, we basically agreed, okay, we'll buy South Korean cars. They're great cars. And in turn, you guys will buy American produce, specifically chickens. Or specifically potatoes, I think was the discussion there. And then what ended up happening is we realized that South Korea was not buying any of our potatoes. And because they made up some stupid law that they can't import external potatoes unless they know the exact plot of land on which it grew. So because we're not tracking our potatoes with GPS accuracy from the moment the seed went into the ground and until it's ready for harvest, and then until it gets to South Korea, therefore we can't sell. So yes, maybe there are zero trade agreements between us and South Koreans, right? But in reality, we were buying a shit ton of South Korean cars and many other electronics and other goods, and in turn they were buying basically nothing of ours, even if it was zero tariffs.
Yeah, my General Motors Buick, as I mentioned in other episodes, is actually made in South Korea. So, that's exactly what it is. These free trade or these fair trade agreements don't always end up that way if the other players aren't being totally fair. Here's Victor Gao, and let's see what his counter argument is.
China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out of the China market, be my guest.
Yeah, and China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. Right. And if the United States wants to bully China, we will deal with the situation without the United States. And we expect to survive for another 5,000 years.
When you hear Donald Trump say China wants a deal, it just doesn't know how to go about it. They're proud people. J.D. Vance talks about Chinese peasants. What do you make of their conduct in this respect?
If J.D. Vance thinks that he's dealing with the peasants in China, and I'm proud to be a descendant of the peasants, most of us are descendants of the peasants anyway, that's our tradition. We are farmers before, but now we are one of the leading industrialized economies in the world. So I'm sorry, J.D. Vance doesn't know what he's talking about. And therefore, I don't think there will be China-US dialogue unless the United States changes its attitude towards China. Deal with China as it is, show respect to China, show respect to the Chinese people, and don't try to impose your prejudice and biased view about China or about the rest of the world.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so first of all, he said, China, we're a 5,000-year-old civilization, and we're going to be here for another 5,000 years. I specifically took note with that because our concept of China has not been around for 5,000 years. It's barely been around for 50 years.
I think that's very true. I think that's very true. That the China of old isn't the China that is of today, of contemporary discussion. So that's an absolute truth. And
yeah, I think the 5,000-year-old China, it's like it wasn't one China, it was about 5,000 different Chinas. It was different tribes, different regions, different kingdoms. And yes, there were some great Chinese empires. Even they never had anything even closely resembling the current borders of China. So China, the way we think of it today, has not been around for 5,000 years. It's barely been around for 100 or 50 years. It's a little over 50, right? But not very long. And then the concept that because of that we're going to be here for another 5,000 years, that's not a very valid argument. Yes, there will probably be people. The truth is, I don't even know if there will be human beings in 5,000 years. But say the world stays the way it is, then maybe that argument kind of makes sense, but that won't be the CCP, right? Definitely not the CCP, that's for sure. And then another one of his arguments was basically China doesn't need the US and we could just replace them. Yeah, like we mentioned earlier, that's just propaganda. There's no basis to any of that.
Yeah, no, I that's the position I have. Again, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I think, listen, in regards to the current situation with the U.S. imposed tariffs, which I really do believe are a tool that are being used to level the playing field and get people to, all these countries to come to the bargaining table, so to speak. What I would say is, perhaps again, you'd mentioned in the past the value of humor in civilization and understanding maybe topics through the lens of humor. The Babylon Bee, which is a right-leaning site,
satirical kind of news
satire.
site.
It's all satire, but I think maybe they'll provide some relief in understanding where we are with the tariffs. I have a clip. Maybe I'd like to get your thoughts on this next clip from the Babylon Bee that explains the whole tariff situation in a nutshell, probably easier than we can. Let me just play that clip real quick.
China, a 34% tariff. That means Chinese finger traps, or finger traps as they're called in China, will now cost $18 each. Japan, sushi will now cost $100 a roll. Anime, which can be pirated for free, will still be pirated for free. So no change there. Thailand, well, Thailand's a made-up country. But India, Slurpees are going up to $2.99. Sell, sell, sell. Now South Korea, which is in this general region over here, a 25% tariff was imposed by Trump. and it has unfortunately offended the nation so much that America has lost the right to host the next Squid Games.
So ultimately, listen, it's better to always take a step back and get some humor out of the situation. I think without that, it's kind of a difficult journey, right? We can't take things without the lens of humor and satire and sarcasm, perhaps helping us make our way through.
Yeah, so for anybody who's familiar with a Babylon Bee but hasn't heard about Not the Bee, go to X and follow Not the Bee immediately. They basically post Babylon Bee style posts, but it's not the bee. It's not satire. It's not a joke. It's 100% real news. And it'll blow your mind if kind of when you watch the Not the Bee videos, or sorry, less videos, but you read their posts and their headlines, and it's just like mind-boggling how unrealistic and upside down of a world sometimes we live in. Specifically, we've been seeing this with the whole woke thing and just many other things. So in an upside down world, you can get satire headlines that are unfortunately not satire at all.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, so that's the thing. The Babylon Bee is satire. They, again, just take it with a grain of salt and have a laugh. And then Not the Bee has, the actual news as it should be reported without the satire and humor. Take your pick, either or. Sometimes actually listening to the, you have a hard time differentiating. In fact, posts often on Not the Bee will question, is this satire or is this really happening? Because sometimes the real news is actually is seeming like satire. And indeed, sometimes the real news actually has the most amount of humor if you have a sense of humor. All right, so here's a clip from the Jesse Waters primetime Fox show. Let me know what your thoughts are.
These countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything, sir.
Trump created maximum leverage for himself, and now his team's sitting pretty, taking meetings and doing deals that put America first. And if we don't like how the negotiation's going, our partners have seen the kind of pain we can cause, and they're motivated to do what we want, or else we'll make them feel the same pain. Everyone said you don't want to be last to come to the table, and China was last.
Yeah, and I think that this is a great way to kind of end the China discussion we've been having. Is at the end of the day, Trump kind of rang the alarm at the firehouse, and everybody came running to the truck, and everybody got on board. And there's just one nation missing out. We saw 75 nations basically lining up, at least 75, to get some type of good trade deal. And China's last. Like we said, dictators get delusional. If it was Israel trying to make these tariff demands that the U.S. is, then Bibi would be completely delusional, right? If this was Latvia trying to make these demands, then Latvia would be delusional. Even France, even Germany. But when it comes to the United States, basically there's nothing that can hold us back because we are the client at the end of the day. China is dependent on their one really important client and then their one backup client, which is Europe. And then everything else is just at the very kind of minimal effect level. So they are dependent on us more than we are dependent on them. We can get our cheap tchotchkes elsewhere. These, a lot of them are manufactured in Mexico anyways. A lot more will be. Mexico is getting in line for a good trade deal. Everybody is, aside from China. So China will be left behind. And I think Xi is kind of panicking because he's acting like he's a superpower. He's delusional that he is a superpower. In reality, he lives on top of a house of cards that hasn't come collapsing completely down yet, but it is in the early phases of that happening.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things changing, again, around the world that, China has done a good job of trying to control a lot of navigational waterways and trying to prevent free movement of, vessels. And, in the same sort of conversation, there's been a lot of talk of the Panama Canal. We had some interesting news recently regarding the United States in brokering an arrangement or a deal, with the Panamanian government regarding the canal, which was built by the United States, in giving essentially preferential passage to our military ships. Let me play you this clip. I want to know your thoughts because it does kind of tie in to the changes that are happening around the world. You know, it's both through the Panama Canal, and ultimately it's going to be navigating waters in and around Asia, where China is trying to control all of those waterways as well.
Yeah, just a note on that. You know, you assume that a superpower has a sphere of influence. Even a regional power has a sphere of influence, right? China has managed to piss off and get into a fight with every single one of its neighbors. It doesn't get along with anybody. Russia and China, everybody talks about them, you know, becoming close friends, but they do not like each other very much. We saw this back during the Sino-Soviet split like 50 years ago. But even more recently, basically Putin realizes that if there's some type of union, you know, East-West, then he's basically becoming Xi Jinping's bitch. And Putin doesn't like being anybody's bitch, right? So that's why Russia is very hesitant of getting close to China. Plus, China has territorial claims on large parts of, you know, Asian Russia, right? Kind of all the way far east. So China is at war with their northern neighbors. They are at war with all of Southeast Asia because of, you know, the 9-dash line and the South China Sea, where they claim that it's basically all of theirs based on nothing. So they're in a fight with every single one of their neighbors, with one exception, and that's Pakistan. And maybe Iran. Everybody else they don't get along with. So how can you be a superpower if you don't even have a regional, you know, sphere of influence? You don't even have regional allies. You know, the U.S. has Mexico and Canada, both are very close allies. China's got none of that. They're surrounded by enemies, all of which hate them because they've been aggressive to everybody. And yeah, they've tried, you know, through the what's it called, the Belt and Road Initiative.
Road and Belt Initiative. Yeah, Road and Belt.
Yeah, the Road and Belt Initiative, right? We've saw them, you know, investing huge amounts of money throughout all of the world, including Panama, and that is what we'll be discussing here about kind of taking over the Panama Canal. And now we're seeing under Trump and U.S. dominance, they're starting to lose those cards too. So, like we said, a collapsing house of cards.
Yeah, the Panama Canal was effectively under Chinese control in large part, and this is now shifting back. Which, again, this is why this ties into the China discussion, because this is a huge blow to China. And let me just play the clip. We can kind of talk about it a little more. Here we go.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announcing a new partnership for U.S. warships to travel first and free through the Panama Canal. He spoke about it today during a cabinet meeting with President Trump.
And signed a couple of historic deals. One which is with the Panama Canal Authority, a framework for U.S. vessels first and free through the Panama Canal. Right. And then also a memorandum of understanding with their security minister.
So why is this important? It's a huge move in deterring China's influence, a growing threat this administration has been warning about, and for good reason. Let's take a closer look. The U.S. spent $350 million engineering the canal, which opened in 2014. Adjusted for inflation, that amounts to roughly $12 to $14 billion in 2025. It is now the largest economic contributor for Panama, and it accounts for 6% of all global trade. In 2024 alone, the canal raked in $5 billion. Now, here's the problem. Chinese companies control 2 of the 5 ports. You're looking at them now. They sit on each side of the Panama Canal, one on the Pacific side, the other on the Atlantic. Now, to understand how this happened, let's go back to 1977. That's when President Jimmy Carter signed the Panama Canal Treaty. It was essentially an American forfeiture of the canal in an effort to guarantee so-called neutrality. Then in 2017, Panama established diplomatic relations with China after severing ties with Taiwan. Now, Chinese influence is apparent all around the port.
Yeah, so I think there was a mistake there. He said the construction of the Panama Canal was completed in 2014. Maybe 1914 is the right year of the completion of the construction of the Panama Canal. I know work, and it started in the late 19th century, so late 1800s. What he may be accurate, what he may be referring to is a refurbishment or a widening of the Panama Canal to allow for much larger ships, and I think that likely completed in 2014. Yeah, so China didn't really control the canal, which is why CNN will say Trump is a liar, Trump is exaggerating, and it's like, yes, they didn't technically control the canal, but if they control ports at both ends and they can have, cameras and spies and military ships and, electronic warfare vessels and everything else there, and even, controlling the ports and the entrance and exits, which are very crucial for many ships to, sometimes they'll offload cargo or, onload cargo. Many times they have to refuel there. If that is controlled by China, then China definitely has a huge amount of influence on, like we said, like he just mentioned, I think 40% of all US containers go through there, right? So just a huge influence on the US economy. So those actions of at least putting the US Navy first, that makes sense. We are the dominant world superpower. So now we're acting a little bit that way, and it kind of makes sense, even if it's not nice in the play garden. I think under the past few democratic regimes, the world stage was imagined to be a kindergarten, and everybody has to play nice. In reality, the world is a brutal jungle, and everything is out there to kill you. And if you're not going to kill it first, they're going to get you, right? So, our objection is to be a beautiful garden in the crazy wilderness.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. And just, to make the point, yes, I think you're right. It was 1914. I think 2014 was referring to was the expansion or the maintenance operations that were being done to widen the canal. And, the concern has been that China's kind of inched its way in bit by bit and taken a tremendous amount of liberties with their presence and outright control of the Panama Canal, which now is disappearing because of the current administration's very strong demands that be done, given the relationship of the United States and having built the canal and so forth and handing it over to Panama. The anticipation was never that a foreign country would go and somehow put a stronghold there. Totally agree.
Yeah, and it's not just Panama. Like we said, they have ports in obviously Djibouti. They have a port in Pakistan. They're building ports all over the world. But not just that, they've become very efficient at managing ports. So they've started to bid on many tenders for port management. And the port of Haifa, which is the most important port in Israel, is now managed by a Chinese corporation, which is scary because the Israeli Navy's kind of based right next door as well, right? I think even the port of Ashdod may be controlled by China now. China purchased Israel's largest dairy company, which was one of the largest companies in Israel and one of the innovators and pioneers in the whole kind of dairy world. Dairy in China wasn't a very common a source of food for very long, but it is something Chinese people are very excited about. So basically learning from the Israelis how to make the best dairy in the world is something they've now done by purchasing, one of these flagship Israeli companies. So now they control the largest Israeli dairy. They control a whole bunch of other companies they've purchased in the West. They control ports all over the West. They're very good at managing ports, right? So it is, and they can put in a very low tender, a very, very affordable bid, right? So it's basically what we've seen is China send their tentacles all over the world, all over their Western world, and start taking control, start purchasing things, kind of like we're starting to see with Qatar. Kind of, they're doing it more on the soft power side of buying sports teams as opposed to the hard power. But both of those countries are really trying to influence the West very strongly.
And as the United States has let more and more manufacturing, more and more control over many of these so-called American products wind up in China, there's been a shift, admittedly, in what we manufacture here, in really what the goals are of U.S. companies. There's a clip from the Sean Ryan show that talks about, U.S. innovation and kind of some very well-known, household names and some things about these companies we may not be aware of. A lot of it had to do with changes because of the work they were doing with or for the U.S. government. And a lot of this has gone to the wayside. I just think it's important because you bring up on, you've brought up on prior episodes and you are mentioning again innovation. I think that's so important. I think if we're not careful and we lose innovation, we lose our foothold, we lose our strength. Let me know your thoughts on this next clip. Really kind of perhaps shedding some light on how things have changed so much over the years and what kind of U.S. companies are up to.
Chrysler used to build cars and missiles. Ford built satellites until 1990. General Mills, the cereal company, built torpedoes and inertial guidance systems in their mechanics division. Everything they learned about building machinery to process cereal, they were able to leverage in the service of national security to make our warfighters more lethal. And what happened was that over time, the government became such a difficult buyer to work with. All sorts of esoteric rules that only matter for the government, all sorts of auditing, all sorts of bureaucracy, that people tried to figure out how to exit that business. That started in the 70s. Boardroom started talking about it. It accelerated in the 80s. And then when the Last Supper happened in 1993, there was this dinner in the Pentagon. We used to have 51 major defense primes. The 15 largest together, they had a dinner and they said, we need a peace dividend. We've won the Cold War. We're going to slash defense spending. So for every dollar we used to spend, we're going to spend 33 cents. And it's going to happen all at once. You guys are not all going to survive. You have our permission to consolidate, to merge, to try to find commercial lines of business, like do what you need to do. And we let that happen until 1999 when we blocked the merger of Lockheed and Northrop. We said, okay, this is too much. So we went from 51 down to 5. The popular narrative is this is when we lost competition in the industrial base. That definitely happened, but I don't think it's the dominant problem. The dominant problem is you lost the consolidation bred conformity.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I agree that lack of competition leads to lack of innovation, and that that's definitely a problem. I think we've gone down that road in our country that it's been just too easy to outsource a lot of what manufacturing we had here, and that even what we were designing here perhaps wasn't as innovative as it needed to be. And I think we were at a crossroads at this point. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a very interesting subject. Aside from, obviously, most people know that during World War II, most of the car manufacturers were kind of used to manufacture, planes, the P-51, and manufacture tanks and other kind of U.S. machinery. Basically, they went on a complete, war footing, and all manufacturing basically moved to war manufacturing. I wasn't aware that it continued on for so long past the end of the war. I oddly didn't know that General Mills, the cereal manufacturer, made missiles. That's just a weird piece of info to happen to know. I think technology is inherently relevant for the military, right? So it is just, if we are at the forefront of technology, specifically physical technology, as opposed to just software only, it can very easily be converted into kind of military tech. The argument against, why nowadays we can't use, Ford to manufacture, tanks or fighter jets is A, Ford doesn't manufacture much in the US anymore. And then B, the military technology has become so much more technology than military, right? So it used to be military with, a few adaptations to technology. And now it is basically technology with few adaptations to military. So because military technology is so complex and so sophisticated, and there are so many unique parts and specific, special technologies and stuff like that, it's a little less possible to transition companies. But the fact that everyday U.S. household names were manufacturing military goods will come surprising to a generation that woke up to giving, Apple giving the CIA access to a terrorist phone for a one-time basis just to unlock the phone so that they can figure out who this terrorist was is like crazy, because how can Apple work with the evil US government? And we're seeing like all of these protests within Google, Alphabet, against Alphabet, selling servers to the US and other NATO militaries and stuff like that as well. So to a generation that was very kind of anti-military and just anti-Western values, it's almost surprising to see how many companies used to very closely work with the military, and it could be very useful, right? We know a lot of civilian tech came out of DARPA, including the internet and GPS and self-driving cars and many other things. And then kind of vice versa, nowadays what we're starting to see with companies like SpaceX, which really is a military manufacturer, right? And I'm trying to remember the name of the company. It's by the social media, the guy who sold his company, who invented Oculus and sold the company to Facebook. He
Yeah.
started a company, and Palantir is a very relevant one as well. They kind of made they make very, very, very advanced AI for the military and kind of the West. So it's important that there now are companies that are very kind of proud in supporting Western values and the Western militaries.
Yeah, no, very true. And I think that ultimately it's important to understand the interlinking between
Anduril, sorry. The name of the company I was referring to is Anduril, and if anybody isn't familiar with them, they are on the very, very forefront of military technology. In general, it's very funny when people talk about the military-industrial complex. They're not very rich. They're not very profitable. They're not very successful. Like we said, during that Last Supper, when they were condensed from 55 innovative companies down to 5, they basically just became, bureaucracies, government bureaucracies, extensions of the government bureaucracy. So they lost all kind of sense of innovation, and that's what we're starting to see with companies like Anduril and Palantir and SpaceX, really kind of which are startups, and they had to fight for the right to be able to compete in kind of in military offers and stuff like that. Finally, we're starting to see some real innovation come to military technology, but obviously it is very bifurcated from civilian technology because those have kind of diverged over the years. So being able to kind of put our military, our industry on a military path, when World War III breaks out, is much more questionable and hard. And one of the advantages of Anduril is that they are focusing on being affordable and being able to ramp up manufacturing at a very high speed, unlike legacy weapon manufacturers like Boeing and Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, and I think what I was saying earlier is, the interlinking between our government and private enterprise. Although there's good and bad that comes with it, there's an understanding that private corporations will be, the United States isn't in the manufacturing business itself. There are companies that manufacture weapons, that manufacture other things, that provide infrastructure for our government. And that's why it's incredibly important that there be a close eye on all this, that the monies that are being spent, taxpayer money, that it's going to the most effective, most innovative companies, that what's being done with those monies is producing the best results, and that there's a tremendous level of efficiency. Now, we would all agree probably that most governments are not, viewed as being the most efficient enterprises. And I think that's an important consideration in all this. With all the technology and everything that exists, we have to make sure that we hold the government accountable to make sure that if work is being offloaded to various projects in the private sector, that those companies aren't just there to reap the financial benefits and make huge amounts of money. That there has to be a net actual value to the base, to the people, to the constituents of our country, that these are the right companies and best companies, and that our government is as efficient as it can be. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And if we're discussing efficiency, like you said, government is always the least efficient of any contender on any bid. They're always like far less efficient than even the very worst, the very, very most inefficient of manufacturing companies or companies in general. So they're just bad at whatever they do. So that's why a small government just kind of seems to make sense, because if you want to get things done, you just want the least amount of people in the way. And the more government bureaucrats you have, the more people there are along the way to getting things done. And yeah, discussing government efficiency, finally, after decades, many decades of zero action on the efficiency front, and just the solution to every problem is more spending, suddenly we have DOGE, which has been cutting spending and cutting waste, and that is very, very critical, and that helps improve efficiency in general, just enabling modern payment systems, modern infrastructure. The fact that to get for government employees to retire doesn't have to go down a physical mine, right? And be limited by the speed of the mine shaft, right? And so many other things is very crucial. But aside from just cutting efficiency and waste, what they've been discovering is also fraud. A lot of fraud, like we discussed before. We already discussed how many wrongfully listed people there were on the social security network. Now what we discovered is that they were giving social security cards to basically every illegal who came to the U.S. and claimed to be an immigrant, not an immigrant, a refugee, right? So anybody who claimed to be a refugee basically just got a social security number, which means they can work legally in the U.S., which in the past was a very hard thing to receive. And more importantly is they can use that to vote. And what DOGE has discovered is many have actually done that. And this doesn't seem like it was a mistake. This seems like it may have been deliberate. So let's go ahead and watch that video.
Yeah, there's a clip that we have that we can, let's take a look at this right now.
Reveal what's really going on. DOGE exposed our immigration asylum disaster. That was the tip of the iceberg. Now here's the story. DOGE has found that immigration gave a work authorization document to illegals just 5 months after they filed for asylum. That document allowed them to work while they waited to hear whether their asylum request had been accepted or denied. So they could work as an illegal, knowing it would take years before their case was heard. The Immigration Department mailed them a social security number. No interview, no proof of identity. Just put it in the mail. Here's your number. In 2021, DOGE says 270,000 new aliens were issued social security numbers, 590,000 in 2022, 964,000 in 2023, and 2.1 million in 24, right before Biden left office. DOGE also discovered that 1.3 million aliens are now receiving Medicaid. Millions received driver's licenses, some registered to vote, and DOGE says some actually did vote. Try and square that against Democrat claims that Musk is destroying Social Security and cutting Medicaid. He's not destroying. He's weeding out people who don't qualify. Who is really guilty of misinformation in this case? It is not Elon Musk.
That is a great ending. That is a great ending. So anybody can claim to be an asylum seeker, and then the U.S. justice system is so backed up, it literally takes 7 years before you end up getting a court date. And then, oops, I forgot to show up at my court date. Oops, I never got the mail to show up, right? And as long as these people receive a social security, they can get a driver's number, they can get a driver's license and stuff like that. It's funny. When we moved to the U.S., I worked for 1.5 years to get my wife an immigrant's visa, which upon arrival in the U.S. is converted into a green card. And I'm pretty sure it took her longer than 5 months to get her actual social security number. But somehow these illegal migrants are getting it wicked fast. And if you look at the time frame, right, kind of the beginning of the Biden administration, it was, huge numbers. And then towards the end, it just ramped up to just ridiculous numbers. And what's interesting is they were literally shipping these people or busing these people or sometimes actually flying these people into swing states to turn these swing states into hardcore blue states. California used to be a swing state until under Reagan, they decided to give amnesty to all of the illegal aliens in California. And ever since then, it became a hardcore blue state. And now there's, very little red in California to speak of, no matter how bad California fails. They're just so entrenched, right? So Biden's plan was to try and do this to every other swing state. And many times the difference between, in swing states between who wins and who loses can be a few thousand votes. So sending in a few tens of thousands of illegals and giving them social security numbers and green cards and maybe encouraging vote, vote, vote. Everybody should go out and vote. Not every American should go out and vote, but everybody should go out and vote. Really seems what the Democratic machine was trying to do. Was to really just steal the democracy of the United States. Because if the swing states turn into Democrat states, then it's a one-party system, and that is very Orwellian.
Yeah, so that clip from Fox Business, I got it through the Benny Johnson, social media channel, and the reason that I preferred that one is Benny had gone and summarized some of these numbers. So in 2021, over 270,000 social security numbers were handed out, as he says, to criminal aliens in that year alone. In 2022, that jumped to over 590,000. In 2023, over 964,000. And if that wasn't enough, in 2024, that was over 2 million Social Security numbers. And I'm going to give you my experience. As I'd mentioned in previous episodes, I grew up in Canada. I came here on a visa. I wasn't working initially. That was not my goal. And when I was issued a Social Security number, it clearly said not valid for employment. It wasn't until later that I transitioned and got a green card. And then, years later, I mean, the whole process took 7 years for me to become a U.S. citizen. This isn't like something that I'd ever seen them just handing this out to people. It's a long process, and someone arriving in a new country doesn't typically have the right to just go start working and taking the job of someone that works there, unless under specific conditions, that the person has a skill that nobody else has or what have you. But that isn't what was happening. And clearly, without a doubt, the motivation to hand out such a huge mass of, millions of Social Security numbers to individuals who then, in turn, a percentage of them went and actually registered to vote, and some did. Now it's been discovered did actually vote illegally because they're not citizens and should have not been able to vote. Certainly not in federal elections. That's certainly concerning. I mean, that just and it does speak to, as you said, I mean, we're bringing this up because government efficiency in and of itself is very important to innovation and progress in the country. But if you have so much fraud, if you have so much money flying out the door, going to things that make no sense, or to companies that are just burning the money, or we're allowing individuals to infiltrate the workforce and to take benefits such as Medicare, Medicaid, housing allowances, and so forth, monies that could be used for other things, that's a major problem, and it's certainly not going to help advance our country.
Yeah, it's like every U.S.'s citizens' goods and services in terms of what they receive from the government drops drastically the moment you allow 2 million people to now get Medicare and Medicaid and everything else, right? And Social Security, etc. So, yeah, it's basically just, we don't care about Americans. We care about the Democratic Party reigning supreme for years and decades to come. And that's what we saw under the Biden administration, and arguably that's straight out treason. So,
yeah, that's definitely a problem. And, again, when we speak about government efficiency, I mean, certainly DOGE is a federal, initiative, but this same thing is happening across the board, in all the states, at the state level, and certainly at the county and city levels. There's a lot of inefficiency. There's a lot of fraud that hasn't even come to light. We were talking about this case out of Minnesota where this guy named Bert Kellerman was talking about the fraud, or certainly the questionable spending that was going on there that's being investigated now. Would you like me to pull that clip up as well? That talks.
yeah, I think that's very fascinating, because we've heard so much about kind of DOGE on the national level, but the waste and fraud has been, equally corrupt on the state level as well. So basically every state has to initiate their own DOGE. We saw, I think, Ron DeSantis out of Florida say that basically he wants to have a DOGE for the state of Florida. And yeah, there's a lot of fraud, but just so much waste. The government has just gotten so used to just wasting because money is free and we could just print it endlessly. So why not just continue doing that? Whoever has to become more efficient. So obviously that creates a tremendous amount of fraud. But it just waste just happens, It's like the U.S. government's wallet is more like a woven basket with humongous holes, and every coin is slipping out of every single hole, and nothing stays. So no wonder why the Democrats had one solution time and time and time again, and the Republicans, to be honest, until Trump, and that was just to print more, or really just add numbers to a computer system.
Yeah, let me play this. This is a clip out of Minnesota. Let's take a look, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Here we go.
This woman was paying herself $700,000 a year running a nonprofit food bank. So she was just taking donor and taxpayer money, buying food and handing it out to poor people, and somehow that was worth $750,000 a year. She wasn't running a regular company where you have to compete with the market and there's pressure from shareholders or anything. She's just giving out free stuff. This is a common tactic for Democrats. They create and exaggerate social problems, then convince people that the government can solve them, which it most likely and often cannot. After they've allocated taxpayer funds to the problem, they insert themselves right in the gravy train and extract wealth off of it and make themselves personally rich. This is what Elon Musk is eliminating at the federal level, but unfortunately it's going on everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, $720,000 is a fairly high salary for CEOs, even in the private industry, unless you're extremely successful, very profitable large company, and even then, you'll typically get stock options instead. So it's more than twice the salary of the president of the United States for running a food bank. How many more people could she have actually fed instead of her one salary, right? And she's not doing anything valuable. She's not creating any goods or services that weren't there before. She's taking a lot of government money and NGO money, which is usually funded from other government sources, and just putting it in her own pocket. Like we mentioned on one of the previous podcasts, they basically sit, every single one of these NGOs and charities has a board, and the board is filled with very, very high paying people who basically do nothing, right? And these NGOs, they're all about their perception of doing good. They don't give a damn about the actuality of giving good. So what they actually create is a lot of bad, right? Because if all you care about the perception of good and not the actuality of good, is you end up creating bad situations for a lot of very, very, very kind of poor people or innocent people or weak people, the bottom of the society that you claim to be helping. Really, you're just screwing them over and really stealing money from them, right? This is money that the state of Minnesota allocated to feeding the poor, but in reality, it's getting pocketed by some corrupt, oh, I work for an NGO, I'm saving the world. Wow, right? So that's really what we've been seeing. It's par for the course of most NGOs. When I used to meet somebody who worked for an NGO, I used to be like, wow, that's amazing, dedication, that's so inspiring. And nowadays, I'm like 80% sure that it's probably just a grift. So many NGOs turned out to be just be money laundering and scams. So it's really important, if you care about the actuality of doing good and not the perception of doing good, don't just give money to NGOs. Investigate every single one of the NGOs you give money to, and make sure the money, realize how much of the money actually ends up in the pockets of the needy versus the administrators who administer kind of stealing things along the way.
Yeah, and you wonder how much, look, here's one of the things that's been asked over and over again during the prior administration. How much did, even Joe Biden know what was going on? How much did all of the government, there are people within the government that totally were aware of a lot of the fraudulent or questionable things and expenditures, but, federal government's so huge, state governments are huge. All it takes is some people just not keeping their eye on the ball to create the ability for rampant fraud, abuse, and waste. There's a clip from Speaker Johnson talking about a conversation he had with Joe Biden, where he didn't even seem to know. This had to do with LNG, with the liquefied natural gas, where gas is compressed down to a liquid for transportation by ship or truck or what have you. And he didn't know really that. I mean, he seemed to not have a clue what was being done, an order that would have come that he should have been aware of. Let me play that clip. I want to see what your thoughts are regarding that. That's a prime example of the government not really seeming to have control or a handle on what it's even doing. Let me play that clip. Here we go.
Long story short, they finally relented. They invited me to the White House. I show up and I realize it's actually an ambush, because it's not just me and the president. It's also Kamala Harris, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem, the CIA director, everybody. But first, real quickly, Mr. President, can I ask you a question? I cannot answer this from my constituents in Louisiana. Sir, why did you pause LNG exports to Europe? I don't understand. Liquefied natural gas is in great demand by our allies. Why would you do that? Because you understand, we just talked about Ukraine. You understand you're fueling Vladimir Putin's war machine, because they got to get their gas from him, And he looks at me stunned with this, and he said, I didn't do that. And I said, Mr. President, yes, you did. It was an executive order, 3 weeks ago. And he goes, no, I didn't do that. And he's arguing with me. I said, Mr. President, respectfully, could I go out here and ask your secretary to print it out? We'll read it together. You definitely did that. And he goes, oh, you talk about natural gas. Yes, sir. He said, no, you misunderstand. He said, what I did is I signed this thing we're gonna conduct a study on the effects of LNG. I said, no, you're not, sir. You paused it. I know. I have the export terminals in my state. I talked to those people this morning. This is doing massive damage to our economy, national security. It occurred to me, Barry, he was not lying to me. He genuinely did not know what he had signed. And I walked out of that meeting with fear and loathing because I thought, we're in serious trouble. Who is running the country? I don't know who put the paper in front of him, but he didn't know.
Yeah, so this really gets back to the grift run by legacy media on the American people, trying for years to convince the American people that, oh, Biden is smart, Biden is aware, Biden knows of everything that's going on, he's focused, he's hardworking, they even had an article about how amazing his sex life is to try and claim how viral he is, he's the most viral president.
Must have missed that one.
Yeah, really. Oh, we'll bring it up for the next one.
It's okay. I'm glad
it is a must watch where mainstream media had a whole set about how Jill claimed that their sex is so amazing, something like that, just trying to show that Biden is actually alive and not senile, right? Not an old man who deserves to be in an old age home, in a nursing home, right? And that kind of gets back to the Autopen question, right? Again, we spoke about this last week. It makes sense. It made sense that in the past, when presidents have to sign lots of documents, that they have an Autopen. But when your president has dementia and doesn't know between right and left, the real question is who is operating the Autopen, because whoever's operating that Autopen is the actual leader of the United States. And it seems like that may have been Jill Biden, surprisingly enough, and just the Democratic elite. It wasn't just one person or a cabal. It was just, it seems like there were a few hundred, maybe a few thousand of just the upper echelons of the Democratic Party and the Democratic donors who are really kind of moving things around. Like we saw when Biden flopped on the debate, the result was just to pull a fast one and just replace him. Who needs elections? Who cares about what the American people think? We are the leaders. We are the ones who have to make the decision for the American people. So that really gets to the core of the question, is who was the president, for between 2024 and between 2020 and 2025, right? We were asking it back then, and it almost seemed facetious. It almost seemed like an exaggeration or a joke. But it is a legit question, who was actually running the show, because it definitely was not Joe Biden.
Well, and there was a lot of fishy things going on. As we know, the media, we've now seen, payments being made through USAID and other routes to well-established media organizations were getting paid by the government, in a roundabout way. These payments have been identified. And then you have, the most powerful of social media companies, including Meta, that were, we know that prior to the acquisition of Twitter, now X, by Elon Musk, there was all kinds of craziness going on over there, with the government basically dictating, much of what they could and couldn't say. Have you seen that clip from the whistleblower that used to work, Sarah, I think was her name, who used to work
I actually
for
watched
Facebook?
the whole hearing.
Yeah,
Very fascinating hearing.
Let me, in case anyone hasn't heard it, let me see if I can cue that one up. That's a very interesting thing, because that was happening during the prior administration. There was, this behind the scenes collaboration between the largest of American companies and foreign powers, basically, in this case, the Chinese government, for the profit and benefit of the company. And, oddly, our own government either looked the other way or didn't seem to be able to figure out that there was all these behind the scenes deals that were being done that could put the United States at risk. Here it is. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, even back with the Twitter files, we realized that the same thing was happening at Meta, and we just didn't have the Meta files for it. And no matter what, the executives and Zuckerberg told us throughout the years was just a complete lie. But now we're seeing with this new hearing, which is definitely worth a listen, is that basically everything they've been saying, including about the relationships with China, was a complete and utter lie. Let's give this a watch.
All right, here we go.
My name is Sarah Wynne Williams, and I served as the Director of Global Public Policy at Facebook, now Meta, for nearly 7 years, starting in 2011. Throughout those 7 years, I saw Meta executives repeatedly undermine U.S. national security and betray American values. They did these things in secret to win favor with Beijing and build an $18 billion business in China. We are engaged in a high-stakes AI arms race against China. And during my time at Meta, company executives lied about what they were doing with the Chinese Communist Party to employees, shareholders, Congress, and the American public. I sit before this committee today to set the record straight about these illegal and dangerous activities. Meta's dishonesty started with the betrayal of core American values. Mark Zuckerberg pledged himself a free speech champion. Yet I witnessed Meta work hand in glove with the Chinese Communist Party to construct and test custom-built censorship tools that silenced and censored their critics.
Yeah, so I mean, we saw Zuckerberg. Obviously, he married Priscilla Chin, who's Chinese, and he learned Mandarin. It's like, okay, beautiful, whatever. I've got nothing against, the Chinese people, of course. They're wonderful people. And when we saw with Jared Kushner that I think his daughter also speaks Chinese fluently as well. So, but with Zuckerberg, it really seemed a fascination with China. And based on this very, very brave woman's testimony, it seems like even though China had blocked Meta from operating right in the space, they were willing to go above and beyond and do everything with the Chinese government, with the CCP directly working with them, including to build up their infrastructure and to teach them many of the core technologies that Meta has developed over the years. So that's the interesting part of the hearing we didn't see in the clip, is they weren't just helping them with censorship and stuff like that, including storing all the data of Chinese users in China, but also all of their correspondence with Americans in China, which means that when Zuckerberg said that no U.S. citizens' data is in China, that was a complete lie. It turns out from this that many of Meta's attorneys have lied under oath, including possibly Zuckerberg himself. But they were helping China build technological capabilities that China did not have and China was struggling to build. And they went out of their way trying to help the CCP do this. So this wasn't, they worked with some, Chinese partner, some company that happens to have ties with the CCP like they all do. No. This is working directly with CCP agents to help the CCP develop technology to spy on their citizens and just create this paranoia state, and do many, many other stuff that they didn't have access to. The Chinese were struggling to build these, and Meta was like, we will help you with anything you want. We will help you build whatever you want, the most advanced technologies that were, developed in the US and discovered and copied by Meta. They basically give it all to the Chinese. So no wonder why Chinese social media companies are so successful, right?
Yeah, there's no debate. And listen, ultimately, if you look at the dates from that reporting, which, was presented by the New York Post, I mean, ultimately, this explains perhaps why, Trump was deplatformed, previously by Facebook, that these media giants weren't always very unbiased in who they allowed to get their voice out. If you're having behind the scenes deals with countries that have a vested interest in controlling the narrative in the United States, that's problematic. At the very least, everyone needs to be aware of what's going on. If a news organization is being funded by our government or by a foreign government or gaining benefit from a foreign power, it's important, just like all of this stuff about Russia interfering. Well, clearly this was, if we're to take at face value what this whistleblower is saying in all or in part, China had tremendous control over the narrative in the United States. And that's a real issue. And without a doubt, they're, if this is being exposed or if this power is being eroded, that's something that they're not too happy with. And I think we need to keep that in mind. I touched upon, as we were in our last discussion about the monies flowing through USAID. There's a guy that Tim Thornton that goes by the online moniker of the old guy not stupid. He reposted a story of USAID shredding documents. I want to put that one up because when things like this are happening, it's not even that they're just happening, but if there's actual government initiatives to cover up the information, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, we remember, there's something called Watergate in this, that's in our annals of history. But if that's happening again now, that's a problem. I mean, let me post this. I want to see what you think. Let me share this with our audience.
NBC News is reporting this. USAID staff is being told to shred and burn all their classified documents. Quote, the U.S. Agency for International Development is instructing its staff in Washington to shred and burn documents, according to an email obtained by NBC News. The document destruction was set to take place Tuesday, according to an email from Erica Carr, the agency's acting executive secretary. Quote, shred as many documents first and reserve the burn bags for when the shredder becomes unavailable or needs a break, Carr wrote. I worked in government for almost a decade. I've never heard of so much shredding being required that you would know ahead of time that, quote, the shredder would become unavailable or need a break. What is that about?
Right. I actually this morning I got a message from somebody who left USAID earlier this year and passed along this email to me. And my response is naturally, is this standard operating procedure? And this individual said no, that they had never heard about burning or shredding of federal records at USAID. But then again, this individual told me they've never heard of the entire agency being gutted and their headquarters at the Ronald Reagan building being shut down. When are documents, burned by the State Department or USAID? Typically at an embassy when it is about to be overtaken, Marines have the authorization as a means of ensuring that classified records and personnel data do not get in the hands of individuals who are seen as threats. They do go and burn documents, but that's not what this situation is here.
Yeah, this is utterly crazy. Basically, we're seeing tactics used when embassies get overrun to, clear and delete any confidential information. We're seeing those same tactics being used within the U.S. government against auditing by the U.S. government, right? Like we said earlier, USAID, it was really kind of the State Department's kind of hush money basket where they used to spend money supposedly for U.S. soft power, but in reality, they were working against the U.S. people every single day of the week. We saw them supporting terrorists, supporting every bad thing, anything that American citizens don't want USAID money to go to. That is exactly what they were funding. So they were working against the American people. Samantha Powers is a very, very evil, very bad person in my opinion. And yeah, they've been just working against the U.S. and its allies for decades, which is why they're so hasty to burn the documents, because they claim to be U.S. soft power, but in reality, they were soft power for the Chinese Communist Party and Russia and Iran, and jihadists around the world, way more than they did anything valuable for the American taxpayer. So it is very good that they were gutted. The very important few important core functions that they had were transferred into the State Department. There's no reason it has to be its own department with a $57 or $63 billion a year budget. No, thank you. No, thank you. The U.S. has the most soft power because of our culture, because of our freedoms, And that enables creativity that the rest of the world is jealous of and is fascinated by. And that's why the rest of the world like a lot of US content, whether it's TV shows or movies or music or clothes or styles or food or whatever it is, for the good and for the bad. The world tends to copy the United States. That is soft power, not giving money to Hamas. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And listen, this isn't, right versus left. This is government. This is government corruption. This is, the government machine that in its by design, okay, has the ability for people to creep into positions that can make powerful decisions that can cause, a lot of downstream effects. A lot of dominoes will fall when these decisions are being made, and it really isn't, it's easy every time that there's a switch from the one party to another. There, obviously there's going to be finger pointed, but it's not that. I mean, it's about calling out what needs to
Like
be
document
called out.
burning.
Say again?
Finger pointing is one thing. Document burning,
Right.
a la, the 1979 revolution in Iran embassy style, that
Yeah,
is not finger pointing. That is just, evidence removing, and that is illegal.
Right. And again, this again is the Watergate scandal. This is Enron Corporation destroying documents where they were shredding everything they could as quick as they could. This is insane because this is government hiding government. Government
Yes.
hiding what actually has happened. Fess up, admit it, move on. Don't hide it. Don't try to, defraud the American people further by pretending like it didn't happen. And again, I think everybody in this country is, trying to just get a handle on where we're really at. It's easy for people to criticize DOGE and saying that there's some people that are going to lose their jobs or departments that perhaps shouldn't have been completely gutted. But I think we're at a point
You'll lose your
where
benefits. Like they were yelling and protesting, you'll lose your benefits, you'll lose your Medicare, your Medicaid, your Social Security. It was never about them. Those people yelling were the scammers, were the
no,
thieves.
and anyone that thinks this through and really starts seeing some of the incredible level of fraud that's been going on, the only way for this country to survive financially is to go and take a very firm stance to fix the things that are wrong and not allow outright fraud like this. And I think we all have to come together. It doesn't matter if someone is Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian. Doesn't matter what which team they are supposedly on. The bottom line is this is for everyone's benefit. There was a really great clip that's been circulating on the internet for those who've seen it, from Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk, of course, he's a conservative who helped found Turning Point USA, and he goes out and goes on college campuses and speaks with students and anyone else that comes forward. Sometimes he isn't allowed to speak. People prevent him from talking. But I think really emblematic of kind of where we're at with trying to bring the country together. There's the father and son clip. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yes, this is a great one. We're only going to show a short portion of it here, but recommend you guys all go out and find the entire clip in its entirety. It is fascinating, and it is a masterclass of communication.
And beyond the skill of communication, it's the touching side of it that you have two different, people that view things differently, father and son. The father is liberal, more siding with the Democrat Party. The
They will
son
watch it.
is more conservative, siding with, MAGA basically on the conservative side. And, and he's Republican. Ultimately, coming together to at least have a discussion, which I think is something we lack in this country for the last several years. People just don't even talk anymore. Let me cue this up. I think, and I agree with you, even the parts that are going to be played, I think that these are just worthy of someone taking the time to look up the clip and search it to find the entire back and forth, because it's very touching, and informative. Here we go.
I think one of the results of the whole kind of MAGA movement was that the left took an MAGA, but the part in MAGA that they hated most was America. So they basically had this kind of anti-America view, which is what we saw the USAID and State Department kind of funding. But basically, anything that's good for America suddenly became bad and evil, and anything that's bad for the U.S. and for the Western values in the Western world suddenly became good in their eyes. Yeah, so this is a great video.
Here we go.
My name is Joey. I brought my father with me. He's a very liberal father, and I'd like.
I'm part of the enemy within, the radical liberals, and I have a question for you. Our family's divided. We're divided the same way the nation is divided.
I'm conservative, by the way.
We fuss and we fight about this all the time. I see the nation coming to the same blows that we are coming to on a daily basis. Yet I don't see the president or anyone in his administration even addressing the issue of the division across our country and across our families. I have a serious question. Will anything ever be remedied? A nation divided against itself will not stand, neither will a family divided against itself. Is there any hope?
Good point. You know, so maybe President Trump should put like a couple people who ran for president as Democrats in his cabinet, right?
It wouldn't hurt a thing.
Yeah, like Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard.
Bobby Kennedy, I wonder if his...
Well,
if
Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi ran for president as Democrats. Has that ever happened in modern American history where a president has put two people who ran against him for the presidency in his own cabinet? Has that ever happened before? Doesn't that help heal a country?
See, that's the division I'm talking about right there.
No, but help me
He's asking me a question, and he turned on me and said,
Okay.
get him.
Hold on, that's a father-son issue. We're having a dialogue.
Yeah, that's it.
But
right?
hold on, let me ask you, why do you think your father is a liberal? Let me ask you.
I think he's a liberal because, well...
No, have him answer. This is. I'm helping you. I'm a group therapist. You understand what I'm charging for this right now? This is like $5,000 an hour stuff. So yeah.
So, I think he's a liberal. Well, I know he's a liberal because he just eats. He gobbles up everything that he. Okay, this is why I know he's a liberal, because he voted for Kamala Harris and he didn't even know why.
Do you think that maybe he wants to believe government will do good? Maybe that's...
Of course. Okay.
Is that a good answer?
Yes, sir.
Now, maybe your son is going more conservative because he thinks government hasn't done a lot of good. Is that maybe a fair charitable interpretation?
That makes relative sense.
Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. So you guys have a generational divide. You look at government as being probably a force for good. He's grown up in a circumstance where he's seen government declare wars and do a lot of nonsense like the Iraq War. He's nodding his head. You know, trigger the financial crisis, only accentuate income inequality. So what I'm just saying for you two, because a father-son divide is more important than politics, is really try to come down at what generational perspective do they have. Finally, where do you get your news from?
You, baby.
Okay, and where do you get and sir, where do you get your news from?
I don't watch any kind of video media at all. I get it mostly by reading, and I go through a broad spectrum of different sources from all over.
So here's what I'll just say in close.
Look, I mean, we'll stop it there, right? I mean, it goes on. It's a great clip, isn't it?
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Specifically because the visuals are almost confusing. When you start the video, you assume that this son with neck tattoos and dressed in completely black, you know, totally goth style, will be the liberal one, but it turns out he's the conservative. And the very conservatively dressed, you know, almost, you know, British style dressed father you'd assume would be the conservative, but he's actually the liberal. But the end is the key. Where do you get your media, right? So if you consume your media from the internet, like we said, the internet has disrupted the stronghold legacy media had over the narrative. Then you're open to a whole bunch of counter narratives, and you realize a lot of things legacy media doesn't want you to know. But if you stick to legacy media, even just reading legacy media, then you're very much just fed the propaganda that they're feeding you. So when you scour the internet, you have access to lots of sources of all different types. And even if you are falsely informed of something, you'll probably see something else that will kind of counter that. But if you just read legacy media, you will be stuck in a bubble.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, we've seen the clips where you have all of these stations across the country that are literally reading the exact same script over and over again. And, you know, ultimately, there's really a small number of organizations that own all of the media. And for that reason, diversified conversation, back and forth, conflicting opinions, kind of what we have on here. Ultimately, we don't always agree 100% what we're talking about, but ultimately the goal is to have these conversations and discussions to broaden the conversation, not to limit it, not to pigeonhole what's going on. And, I think as time goes on, the hope is that people will start seeing that a lot of these issues really aren't partisan. This isn't the right versus left, left versus right. It's about right versus wrong and wrong versus right. It's about doing things for the best of the country. It's the thing of like the father and son wanting the best for each other. They love and care for each other, but they view things from a different lens. And maybe what they're seeing is the same thing, but they're interpreting it very differently. And being able to converse between both of them, I think being able to voice those opinions. The worst thing that could possibly happen is that father and son don't even say what's on their mind, right? What's in their hearts. That perhaps as they discuss it, each one of them may inch a little bit closer to understanding what the broader truth is. Does that make sense?
If a husband and wife yell at each other, they're just the husband and wife. If they don't communicate with each other, then they're on their way to get divorced, right? So,
totally true.
I think while you kind of bring up that last video that we wanted to show, just kind of a little bit of a happy ending on the subject, I do have a small anecdote. I had went to Toronto for a relative's bar mitzvah, and they're very liberal, and their synagogue is extremely, extremely liberal. And he knew that kind of my brothers and I are slightly conservative, and that we don't think of, Trump as being a Nazi, which, 5 years ago in Canada was unheard of. So we were kind of the radical ones. And he was like, you guys will never get along with a whole bunch of people here. So when we arrived and we were sitting down, he pointed at a table, or maybe I happened to sit down and start talking to somebody, and he was like, you guys will never get along. And we were having a great conversation. And I was like, why? Why do you think so? And he says, well, you guys are just, complete opposite sides of, the political discourse. I was like, for example, abortions. I was like, okay, let's find a common ground. I said, do we both agree that people should have a right for an abortion at the very, very early stages, first month or two, right, before the fetus is developed? Like, yeah, most people agree with that. Okay. I was like, do you guys agree that murdering a 9-month-old baby who's still in the womb and is ready to come out by putting scissors in and start chopping it to pieces, when we can see on ultrasound it reacts to the pain, do we agree that that is kind of evil and should be wrong? They're like, yeah, obviously. Right? So I was like, okay, so everybody thinks we can't agree with each other. I think that the majority, 80% of Americans agree on 80% of subjects, right? So I think that, the media will tell you, oh, these people don't care about women's rights, and that's why they're trying to ban abortion, and they hate women, right? And then the other side is yelling at you, they're murderers, and they want to kill babies, and they're baby slaughterers, right? And that's why they want to enable abortion. I was like, in reality, we basically all agree that what some on the very far left have been doing, which is enabling abortions at the very end, the last trimester, and, even further on, even theoretically babies after they've been born, right? We can abort babies that have been born. That's just straight out murder, right? So we all agree that that is wrong. And we all agree that, yes, people make a mistake. Yes, condoms burst. Yes, there are issues sometimes. And at least at the beginning, people should have a right to say, hey, listen, this isn't, I'm not ready for this right now. Let's kind of restart. It's very early. Nothing much is developed. Most people, aside from the very extremely religious, will usually agree with that. And even the extreme religious will usually agree to make an exception for incest and for rape, right? Which is something that the media won't tell you. So it's like, based on the media you consume, you will hear one narrative or another. In reality, 80% of Americans agree that it should be somewhere in the middle. At the beginning, no problem. At the end, big problem. Somewhere in the middle is we should find a middle ground, right? And different countries debate that. By the way, almost the entire world, abortion is not a big debate. it's agreed upon that at the very early times, it's not a big deal, especially if you're taking a pill and something like that, right? Or using a condom. Some people will say that that's abortion too. And on the other end, that, that's bad. So almost everybody agree. If you look at most Western countries, the limit is somewhere in the middle, whether it's 3 months or 4 months or 5 months or 6 months, but somewhere there is where most countries put the line, right? So instead of saying, hey, why don't we have a national conversation and see what most Americans agree upon is the right moral thing to do and the wrong moral thing, like where exactly should we put this line? Is it when heartbeat starts? Is it when the brain develops? Is it when, the fetus is complete in terms of its form? Whatever, they're different, those are all legitimate opinions. We can discuss and have those, but the narrative is that it's an all-out war between people who want to murder babies and people who think that women have no right to their bodies, right? When in reality, it's just a much more nuanced and sophisticated decision that most of the world has already decided somewhere in the middle and has rules and laws, to that regard. But for some reason in the US, it's like this big topic. It's a taboo we can't even discuss. And if we discuss it, it immediately becomes a war. And that is because of the media. And everybody there completely agreed with that. And my uncle, who was like completely shocked that we're actually getting along, it was like, we're all normal people. We're all good-hearted people. We all understand the same things. It's just a matter of perspective. And we are fed our perspective based on the media we consume. So that's kind of what we saw on the previous video. But in terms of communication,
I think that that's super important. And I think that, like podcasting, why are we talking? We want to discuss things. You and I have been doing this for years, just that now we're actually recording it. But, ultimately sharing ideas, even if they're differing in part or in whole, I think that's how we gain a better understanding. And, one of the other things that we talked about is that, there was this recent visit of Bill Maher to the White House to visit Trump, which was brokered by his friend Bob, aka Kid Rock. He calls him Bob. Bill Maher, talked about this on, he's got this show on HBO, and ultimately he went and discussed this visit that a lot of people were watching. He's an old-time Democrat, old-time liberal, old school kind of guy, and really represents more of what the Democrat Party used to be. He's by no means a Trump supporter. He's by no means MAGA. He's by no means Republican. Yet he was willing to take the invitation and go. And it's one of these that I would encourage everyone to go and try to look at listen to the entire monologue and discussion that he's having, that where he recounts his visit to the White House. We have a piece of it here where I think it just helps bring together the truth about our country and how people need to, and he does it, of course, as a comedian, so he still points out, his differing views and what his expectations are or aren't for Trump. But he was willing to go meet with him, and he is reporting back what I believe is an honest account of what his visit was like. And I think it's helpful to everyone that listens to us to understand that, although you and I both, often will talk about things that seem more, right-leaning, it doesn't mean that our views are entirely in one way or the other. We're both individuals, and we view things the way we view them. And that's why we like discussing them, because I think it's unfortunate that everyone seems to get pigeonholed into one specific category or camp or whatever. At the end of the day, I agree with you that most Americans are let's take a step back. Maybe not just Americans, more people around the world, generally speaking, have similar views on the majority of things. So let me cue this up so we can listen and kind of give our own, comments after. But I think this is actually, I think, very helpful. Here we go.
So I had dinner with President Trump, a dinner that was set up by my friend Kid Rock, because we share a belief that there's got to be something better than hurling insults from 3,000 miles away. And let me first say that to all the people who treated this like it was some kind of summit meeting, you're ridiculous. Like I was going to sign a treaty or something. I have no power. I'm a fucking comedian, and he's the most powerful leader in the world. I'm not the leader of anything, except maybe a contingent of centrist-minded people who think there's got to be a better way of running this country than hating each other every minute. So, thank you. Okay, so meet up in person. Maybe it'll be different. Spoiler alert, it was. First good sign, before I left for the Capitol, I had my staff collect and print out this list of almost 60 different insulting epithets that the president has said about me. Things like stupid, dummy, lowlife dummy, sleazebag, sick, sad, stone cold crazy. Really a dumb guy, fired like a dog, his show is dead. There's 60. I brought this to the White House because I wanted him to sign it, which he did. Which he did with good humor. And I know as I say that, millions of liberal sphincters just tightened. Oh my God, Bill, are you going to say something nice about him? What I'm going to do is report exactly what happened. You decide what you think about it. And if that's not enough pure Trump hate for you, I don't give a fuck. So no, I didn't go MAGA. And to the president's credit, there was no pressure to. After we left the Oval Office, he showed me the little room off the office, you know, the one where Clinton used to. Okay. The blowjob room. Okay. Well, not anymore. That's where they keep the merch now. It is. And he gave me a bunch of hats, but he didn't ask me to take a picture in one, which I appreciated. The guy I met is not the person who the night before the dinner shit-tweeted a bunch of nasty crap about how he thought this dinner was a bad idea and what a deranged asshole I was. I read it and thought, oh, what a lovely way to welcome someone to your house. But when I got there, that guy wasn't living there. Now, does Trump want respect? Of course, who doesn't? My friend said to me, what are you going to wear to the White House? I said, I don't know, but I'm not going to dress like Zelensky, I'll tell you that. But, okay, most surreal part of the whole night was when I got home. I flew back right after the dinner, and I'm in bed watching 60 Minutes from the night before. And there's Trump in one of their stories, standing at a podium in a room that looked to me like one of the rooms and places we'd just been in. And he's ranting, disgusting, you're a terrible person. And I'm like, who's that guy? What happened to Glinda the Good Witch? And why can't we get the guy I met to be the public guy? And I'm not saying it's our responsibility to do that. It's not. I'm just reporting exactly what I saw over 2.5 hours. I went into the mine, and that's what's down there. A crazy person doesn't live in the White House. A person who plays a crazy person on TV a lot lives there, which I know is fucked up. It's just not as fucked up as I thought it was.
Yeah, this is great. Basically, from every anecdote we've seen of Trump throughout many years, it seems that on a business level, when it comes to business negotiations, he will just slaughter you and eat you up. But on a personal level, in terms of meeting people, he's very friendly. He's very easy to get along with. He can take a joke. He can take a stab. He can take a nab. He'll laugh it off. He'll continue. He's usually very friendly, very easygoing. And that's what we saw here, even though he wasn't excited about meeting Bill Maher. And obviously they had an antagonistic past between them. Overall, on a personal level, he's kind of a wonderful guy. His TV persona is what we get a lot, and it's very entertaining, and one of the reasons why he's been so successful. And I think it's also one of the reasons why the whole world is lining up to kiss his ass, like he said earlier, right? Like we saw earlier, because that persona is good to make the U.S. look strong. Very strong little, maybe a little cuckoo. Always, you can never anticipate his next move. He can always pull a fast one on you. But on a personal level, just a really nice guy who, over many years, has done very, very a lot of very wonderful things. We've seen many stories of charity he's given. Secret stuff, not publicized, just helping people in need for decades, right? Of people of all ethnicities, of all races, even back when he was just a New York businessman. So, yeah, he's a nice guy, but he definitely built up his persona over TV.
Yeah, I can attest to a conversation I had many years ago. This was many years before he ran for office, for public office. This is probably in the early days of him being, on TV, on The Apprentice. This was when he was, if anything, someone that everyone, Oprah Winfrey, you name it, everybody basically wanted to be around and be seen with him. He was, a very successful business person, very well known throughout the world and certainly in New York. And he was pretty much loved by most people. But the reality is, today a lot of people have different views of him. And one of the interesting things I was told back in those days, after someone told me that they golf with him from time to time, this gentleman was in political office and lived up in the Lake Worth area, and he would golf at Mar-a-Lago with Trump periodically. And he said, listen, I asked him, what's he like, in real life? And he said, well, as a person, he's the most genuine person you'll ever meet. He'll literally take the shirt off his back for someone. He will go and just do kind acts for people, for his workers. And over the years, I've had opportunity to speak with some of the people that work at, his different resorts. And I've asked, and of course, perhaps they were scared of maybe saying something different, but they all have given me very positive comments about what it's like to work for the Trump family and the Trump organization. But this gentleman who would golf with Trump from time to time said, listen, he just is that kind of guy. You won't know how kind he is because it's not publicized. Now, on the flip side, when you're in a business negotiation with him, he can be ruthless. He knows how to win an argument and how to get things done. And he wants to win in business. And perhaps that's what we're seeing. We see that side of him coming out that is the one side, but just like Bill Maher says, there's really, it's like many of us, if for example, someone is a judge, they may act somewhat differently in the courtroom than if they are out at the beach. They're still the same person, but they may have different facets to their personality. And I think in some individuals, perhaps it's more, obvious, as perhaps in Trump's case, but I think that's super important. And I think ultimately, understanding that, hearing that from a guy like Bill Maher, I think is important for us to have some confidence that the person that's running our country primarily as the leader of the free world isn't the things that the media has made him out to be in such a negative sense at all. And, I think that communication is at the root of all of this. We need to talk, be it on a podcast like this, be it just casual conversation. People need to stop shutting others out. We need to hear each other. We need to listen to different points of view, like that father and son clip with Charlie Kirk. I think that's super important. And I think that we can learn from the universe and the world about the importance of communication.
Yeah, for many years, I've been a fan of a documentary-style TV show called Undercover Boss, where the CEOs of large corporations will have, a facial remake, and they'll go undercover and talk with, the line employees, whether it's factories or services or whatever it is, plumbers, it doesn't matter. But just getting actual days of hard work, kind of getting the fingers dirty, putting the head in the dust, right? And really getting to work, climbing up duct vents and who knows what else. But while talking to these employees, they kind of got to see the inside of what first of all, what working for their company is like, but also what these people actually have to say about the company. Now, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think Trump ever did that. I don't think Trump is capable of doing it just because his mannerisms are so uniquely Trump that no matter what type of disguise you try and put on him, he will identifiably be Trump every single day of the week. But I always wished for the government, for the president, to have an undercover boss style thing. So yes, Trump never went undercover, but one thing is consistent from every organization he's ever worked at is he likes to ask the opinion of the average Joe who works for him, what they think. You'll see him regularly talk to the waiters, talk to the security guards, talk to the policemen, talk to just the line nurses, whoever it is, the people who work at his golf resorts, just the caddies, the staff members, and ask them for their opinions on stuff. For years and years and years, this is not something new. We've seen Trump do this. It's one of his ways of really getting the complete picture of what's going on, is just by asking as many people as possible from as many backgrounds as possible and as many ranks and position levels as possible to get the complete picture. And that's how he makes decisions. And he's always been like that. So yes, it's not undercover boss because it's not undercover, but the fact that we have a leader in chief who actually cares what the low-level employees think is kind of impressive and remarkable. And it's one of the nice things of having an outsider as opposed to a kind of hardcore politician as a leader.
Well, we know that he can go and, make French fries, so he could probably go and do other things undercover as well. But
that wasn't undercover.
I know. But, again, I completely agree with that. I like that show. And I think it's important for us to get in touch with kind of everyone around us, and certainly to, again, communicate. That's the bottom line. We need to hear what people are saying. I think the value of that show was for the bosses to really understand what the rank and file was thinking about the company, thinking about their jobs, thinking about, how they could improve the company or what was wrong with it. I mean, these are things that normally people wouldn't have the courage, perhaps, to tell their bosses. So it was an interesting show, to say the least. And of course, well put together, had a lot of humor in it. But again, back to this, it all comes down to communication. If we could all just learn to better communicate, I think it would be better for everyone involved. Even if sometimes you hear things like in The Undercover Boss that you don't necessarily want to hear, it's things that you need to hear.
Exactly.
It's like that the what you pointed out to me about the communication with whales.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I think on that note of kind of communicating, or at least if you want to pull that up, we can watch that quickly. But there's not much we have to discuss about it. Just a fascinating thing about communication. In this case, not our species communication, which just makes it far more fascinating. But on that note of communication, please communicate with us. We are all into listening to, reading your comments and listening to know what you think about this podcast. Specifically, this episode has been kind of different. We've, showed a lot of videos. Do you guys like the more visual style podcast, or do you prefer the audio only? Do you guys like the fact that we're cutting in and playing videos from other sources, just kind of making things more interesting? Or do you prefer kind of a more kind of lengthy flowing conversation? Yeah, kind of get down into the comments and please let us know what you think.
Absolutely. And again, the goal is to have as much audio, even if we play video clips, so that those that are not watching on YouTube or Rumble or elsewhere that has a video stream, that still won't feel detached from what's going on. I'm going to play this clip anyways. I do think it has a value, very briefly, and then I'll make a comment on it, and I think that'll wrap the show up. Let me this one's on YouTube. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Hang on.
In 1955, in the depths of the Cold War, the US Navy launched a classified program to deploy underwater microphones in an attempt to track enemy movements. But amongst the deep mechanical rumblings of the distant submarines, they also detected something strange, an eerily haunting whine that echoed across the ocean. For years, the source of these strange recordings went undiscovered. Unidentified ships or unknown geological phenomena seemed the most likely explanation. That was until the files became declassified and were handed to a young biologist who suggested another option: that we were listening in to the conversations of one of the largest and loudest animals on the planet, the humpback whale. Previously thought of as a silent beast of the ocean, whale calls became a source of deep fascination for scientists and restless sleepers around the world.
And I'll stop it right there. I mean, ultimately, why I find that valuable was something that you brought up. You know, I remember years ago hearing about these recordings, and you could actually buy the songs of the humpback whale. This guy, Ben Miles, speaks numerous languages. He spent time in Beijing and speaks Mandarin and so forth. And he brought that story on his YouTube channel. It's an interesting story, just that communication is extremely important. The reason I thought it was interesting in the context of what we've been discussing is that sometimes conversations on politics and social issues like abortion and other such things seem like people are either talking over each other, almost like they're talking two different languages. The father and son that we saw in that Charlie Kirk video often, I think, could feel that same way. And I think that today in the country, we have people that either won't listen, and even if they're speaking the same language, are not communicating and listening to what the others have to say. And if you take a step back and you understand that we're all trying to communicate how we see things from our perspective, and that there is a value in just allowing that communication, in encouraging more communication, in allowing freedom of speech and thought, in allowing dissent and disagreement, that's how we move ahead. And that's, again, I think part of why we're here, and why after years of talking of getting a podcast together, you and I have decided to do this. And it's on the urging of people we know and we've talked to, and we keep all these years saying, well, there's this podcast, want to get started. And people are like, well, you should do it. You two guys could talk forever about all these different topics. And I hope that that's really what we're scratching the surface on, is helping motivate further discussion and further interest, and trying to bridge the divide where, not listening or hearing but not understanding could be the worst thing.
Yeah, and worst of all is trying to block it off and not be willing to kind of hear it at all.
I think that's enough for episode 4. I think we've covered a lot of topics, brought up a lot of questions, and stirred some debate perhaps. Again, we want to hear back from everyone as we continue on the journey. We want to have you along with us. Be sure to like and follow and download the episodes as they come along. And we'll be back next time for the next episode, right?
Yeah, awesome. Can't wait. Thank you guys, everybody, for participating. And yeah, please let us know if you prefer this kind of more kind of video, different topics kind of coming up, different clips we comment on, or if you guys prefer kind of a free-flowing communication, just conversation style. Thank you so much for joining. And on that note, it's time to end.
Time to end. Bye, Yo.
Bye, Joe.
Bye, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.